Today we are extremely lucky to have with us Rukmini Banerjee, who is one of the leaders of Pratham. Pratham, as you now know, is one of the key heroes of our education lecture. You've seen Rukmini speaking at the Clinton Global Initiative in the introduction segment for this session. But now we have her in person, we can ask her the questions that we want to ask. And this is always an extremely interesting, entertaining, fascinating endeavor. So thank you very much for being here. Rukmini, what I want to start with is in a sense where maybe I was when I was a student, maybe 15 years ago, just starting to get interested in the field of education. And at the time, the one key problems that policymakers and to a large extent academics were trying to address is why are students not going to school and how to make them go to school. And I feel that sometimes the policymaking world is still stuck a little bit in that mindset. Do you think that's still the question we should be asking?
I mean, I think luckily for us, the world has moved on since you were a student. And we have very large numbers of children already enrolled in school, more or less across, I would say, the developing world. But the question is that they're enrolled in school, what does that mean? So in some places, it means that their name is in school and they go to school every day. And in some places, it means that their names are on the school books, but they go sometimes. So in a sense, the question is not so much how to bring them to school, but how to help them to come every day. And then if you come every day, the thing that we're all looking for is that the children need to learn well. And so I think on the going to school curve, we are quite far along. We know what it takes to bring them to school. We know what is involved. We know experiences from many countries. But what it takes for them to stay there and to learn, I think we're very early. But our focus really needs to be on our children learning, because you can't learn unless you're in school all the time. And
what has been your experience in the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years since we've known each other, of how students can learn and what has worked, what hasn't worked, whether the policy discourse on what will help kids to learn is going in the right direction, wrong direction?
See, I think that it's very easy to look back from 15 years and look at it, and have kind of the answer. And as all of you know, all of this takes a lot of experimentation, a lot of gathering of evidence, looking back and forwards. But I think where we are in India, and I can't speak for other places because I don't know other places, where we are is that the most effective way to teach children is to know where they are right now, regardless of age or grade. Look at where they are right now, build on some very fundamental building blocks like reading, like talking about what you have read or heard, like basic arithmetic. Look at where kids are and then work from there to where you want them to be. I think the mistake that we make in our country at least is that we have this grade level curriculum and syllabus, and we teach from the curriculum to the children rather than from the children to what they can do. And I think this is it seems like a very simple common sense thing, but somehow it seems to escape most people who are developing the basic contours of the education system, that you need to start where you are today, you need to have reasonable goals, and you need to have simple methods by which you can get to those goals. Which, by the way, I think for at least primary school children should not be that hard to do. And as the evidence that you have helped to collect shows, that these very simple ways of organizing kids, having instructional materials that make sense to them, not only raises attendance, but also brings learning quite quickly. And I don't mean, I think the first graders or the second graders have time. But for the kids who are already 3 or 4 years into school, you need to do something like this, because otherwise they'll be lost. Already the curriculum is so high that it really teaches only the top maybe 5 or 10% in the class. So get to the basics. I know that's a bad word in some parts of the world, but I think if you don't have the fundamental skills, you're not going to move on.
So when I explain to people, where we are after 10 years, 15 years of collaborating with you, and I'm really liking to cite education as one place where we start to get a sense of what needs to be done, not at a program by program level, intervention by intervention, but as a general principle. The general principle being what you just articulated, which is you need to teach at the level at which the child is, just above so that they can get where they need to be. Then when I say that, usually it's a bit anti-climatic because people say, well, like it took you a while to get there, and that seems like reasonably obvious. And why? In fact, it's not obvious because that's, as you say, it's not the way education systems are set. Why do you think it's actually so difficult to get that message across? Or maybe you tell me it's not difficult, but why, in some sense, it took us a little while to get there, even you, and now it is still there's still a big struggle ahead, and we'll talk about that in a moment, of getting that message to be mainstreamed inside government system in India and elsewhere in the world, because I do think it's not an India-specific phenomenon. So why is it so hard for people to get that message, which at some level seems pretty obvious?
Let me try. This is a complicated question, but let me try. Recently, I was in a meeting with a lot of government people, and we were discussing something to do with learning and assessment. And I was kind of really trying to push this point to say that let's just look at where kids really are. And somebody turned to me and said, why are you so attached to reality? Which completely silenced at least me for quite some time. And I think that at the core of that question is really the answer to your set of questions. We build our education system built on many assumptions. And we just assume that these must be right. For example, there are a couple of assumptions in India which, we also took at face value when we started working here. Our right to education laws start at 6 and go all the way to guaranteeing education till age 14. But actually, if you look at a classroom, there are kids in there who are 4, maybe even under 4, 5. I mean, a bulk of our first graders are well below 6. But we've designed our curriculum pretending that they'll come in at a certain cognitive development level and they'll move on from there. So, even our first step is on very shaky ground. Then we assume that, kids will move in a kind of linear fashion from grade to grade to grade. And in each grade, they will have miraculously mastered whatever was expected of them in the previous grade. Now, look at the kids who are going to school in India. 50% of their moms have not been to school. So the home support is, largely missing. In school, we have this grade level progression assumption, but no method by which to help kids who are not making progress at that level. But we'd like to think that we are like all other education systems elsewhere, who also move their children in this fashion, but have these both home support as well as in-school support to help kids who are not making enough progress. We also have, I think, there are, again, I don't know much about other countries, but I think in other countries, the curriculum standards are much more at the level where most children can actually achieve them as we go along. Our curriculum standards are, I think, based on, they're made by well-meaning people, by committed people, but I think because of this lack of attachment to reality, it aims at much harder. A colleague who Dana Schmidt from the Hewlett Foundation, was traveling with me in Assam in the eastern part of India. And she picked up the English textbook, so English as a second language or third language in Assam, for second graders, and said this is tougher than what the kids that she knows in San Francisco study as their first language. So I think we have a lot of assumptions that we need to really tackle. And if you connect, if you reduce the gap between our reality and our assumptions, I think some of the problem could be solved. But because you've built this based on these assumptions, it's very difficult for you to move away from the assumptions unless you're forced to deal with reality. So I've come to the conclusion that this is what is one of the major blocks. And we pride ourselves in India that our curriculum is like everybody else in the world. The point is that we are not like everybody else in the world, or what everybody else imagines is the world.
So you've discussed, and I think really put your finger on the key obstacle in making progress, which is that you personally and Pratham as an organization has been an absolute leader in being attached to reality, both in establishing what reality is through the ASA reports and in working with JPAL and with others to develop an understanding of what could be done about this reality, based both on your field experience and on evaluation of this field experience. Can you now, on the flip side, talk about your recent experience on actually maybe making some dent into the policy-making world and to getting a little bit of that reality to step in and potentially evolving with government partners answers to this reality?
So I think that, you know, as you said right in the beginning, that the focus, let's say 10, 15 years ago, was on access and inputs and getting children into school. And we want to move that spotlight onto our children learning. So that's taking a little bit of time to get there. Our USSER reports, which really look at a very large scale collection of evidence by many thousand volunteers, at a very basic question, can children read? Do they go to school? Can they read? Can they do basic arithmetic? Has helped, I think, over the last 9 years to bring this measure of reality into the public domain. Now that it is there and now that the spotlight is beginning to move, along with that, I think we also need large-scale examples of how things can change. Otherwise, it's sort of like measuring the temperature of a very sick person over and over again without coming up with any, you know, solution. So, you know, the number of things that we've done, which some of which you evaluated, are all attempts to see how can you really improve learning using the resources that you have right now. The people that you have, the time that you have, and the money that you have, meaning within the government system. And we find the best places for this to sort of to move is when people at the leadership level are also looking for some answers. So if the people at the leadership level are really looking only to go that last mile for enrollment from 95% to 100%, they don't tend to be interested in this whole question of learning. But if there are people within the policymakers or within the implementers who are looking to say, okay, now I have very good results for my enrollment and I'm looking to see how learning can improve, let's experiment, let's try things which are out of the box. That's the right place. And I think that the part of what we have done over the last some years is both have a methodology for how that can happen, which, you know, as you said, is very simple. You group children by their level, you give them appropriate materials, you use activities that help them make progress, and you measure, because that's what shows you that things are changing. And if you do this in a large scale enough way, you can see that even ordinary people, ordinary teachers, ordinary volunteers can make this happen. But I think the beginning point is important. Somebody has to want the answer to this question. So the big challenge, I think, today is how do you build this appetite for moving, not just to understanding the problem, but now to solving the problem, and how do you create a culture for taking risks and wanting to do things which are outside our box of sort of assumptions that have held us.
I think that's a great place to end. This is, I think, a lesson that you can take with you, not only for education, but across sectors. It's really a lot of the job that will develop to use the students to take this material and try and see how do we make this reality have an impact in the world at large. So thank you very much for this great conversation.
Thank you.